I never imagined I'd be the guy posting something like this, but here I am, sitting in my half-empty house, trying to make sense of everything. I've read stories like mine before, tales of betrayal, deceit, and marriages falling apart, but I always thought those things happened to other people, not to me. I thought my wife, Lauren, and I had something real, something solid. We'd been married for 8 years. And sure, things weren't always perfect, but I thought that was normal. Every couple has their ups and downs, right? That's what I kept telling myself, even as the distance between us grew. I chalked it up to life getting in the way. Stress from work, exhaustion, the general wear and tear of marriage. I didn't realize that while I was busy making excuses, Lauren was busy leading an entirely different life. The first signs were subtle, the kind of things you notice in passing but don't dwell on. Lauren started dressing differently. Not just a new outfit here and there, but a complete shift in how she presented herself. She started wearing designer clothes, expensive perfume, heels that didn't seem practical for running errands like she claimed she was doing. I remember making a joke about it one night, saying something about how she looked like she was heading to some high-end gala rather than out for drinks with the girls. And she just laughed it off, saying she wanted to feel good about herself. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? I wanted to support her feeling confident, even if it felt like she was dressing up for someone other than me. Then there were the absences. It started with simple things. Late nights out, sudden work events she had never mentioned before. Weekends away that didn't make much sense. First, I didn't think much of it. Lauren had always been independent, had always liked having time to herself, and I respected that. But the excuses got more elaborate, the details of her stories more inconsistent. One weekend she was at a yoga retreat with a friend. The next she was at her sister's house. Then she was helping a coworker through a tough time. It wasn't just the frequency that bothered me. It was the way she said it all so casually, so effortlessly, like she had rehearsed her lines in advance. Then there were the changes in her demeanor. Lauren had always been sharp-tongued, but now she seemed almost condescending when she spoke to me, as if I were an inconvenience, something she had to put up with. If I questioned anything, why she was always on her phone, why she seemed distant, she would turn it around on me. "You're paranoid," she'd snap. Or, "Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't need so many nights out." That one hit hard. I started wondering if maybe she was right. Maybe I had gotten complacent. Maybe I hadn't been putting in enough effort. The self-doubt crept in like poison, making me feel like I was the problem. But the worst part? She had been more affectionate, almost too much so. There were random apologies for things I didn't even know had happened. Sudden acts of kindness that felt forced. It was like she was trying to compensate for something, like she was trying to balance out whatever guilt she might have felt. I should have seen it then, should have realized that something was deeply wrong, but I didn't. I convinced myself that things were just going through a weird phase, that we would get back to normal eventually. And then, one night, everything changed. It was late, and Lauren was already asleep when I came into the bedroom. I was looking for my phone charger, rummaging through the nightstand when my fingers brushed against something unusual. A book, thick and heavy, tucked underneath a pile of random papers. I pulled it out, expecting some novel she had been reading, but the second I saw the first page, my stomach dropped. It was a journal, but not just any journal, her journal. And what was inside would completely destroy everything I thought I knew about my wife. I don't know why I opened the journal. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was instinct, or maybe, deep down, I already knew there was something in there I needed to see. My hands shook as I flipped past the first few pages, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The first entry I read wasn't just a casual note or a reflection on her day. It was detailed, strangely specific, and as I took in the words, my stomach twisted into knots. She wrote about meeting him. The entry described everything in a way that made me feel like I was standing in the room with them, watching my wife slip into a world that I never even knew existed. There were mentions of late-night rendezvous, of quiet hotels with dimly lit bars, of private drivers picking her up and taking her to places I had never heard her mention before. The way she described him, this mystery man, sent chills down my spine. He wasn't just some random fling. This was something planned, something deliberate. She called him Jay, leaving out his full name, but the way she spoke about him, it was clear she thought he was someone special. A wealthy, powerful, older man who made her feel like a queen, who spoiled her with expensive gifts, who took her to exclusive events where she felt like she belonged to some elite world far removed from the life she had with me. She wrote about the excitement of sneaking around, about the thrill of the secrecy, how she had never felt so alive. I felt sick. Every word on those pages was a knife to the gut, a reminder that while I was at work thinking about how to make our marriage better, my wife was off living a fantasy with a man who had everything I apparently lacked. I kept reading, even though every fiber of my being told me to stop. The entries spanned over a year. An entire year of deceit. She detailed her excuses, the lies she told me to cover her tracks, the satisfaction she felt when she got away with it. She even wrote about how easy it was to manipulate me, how she could twist situations to make me feel guilty whenever I got suspicious. Ryan will believe anything as long as I give him the right answer, one entry read. That line alone made my blood turn to ice. She had played me, deliberately, knowingly, like I was some clueless fool who would never dare to question her. I could feel the rage bubbling inside me, mixing with the humiliation of knowing that my wife had been laughing at me behind my back while she ran around with some rich guy who could give her the finer things in life. Then there were the gifts. I had noticed the designer bags, the jewelry, the sudden influx of luxury items that she had never cared for before. When I had asked about them, she had told me she had saved up for them, that she had gotten a bonus at work, that her friends had given her shopping recommendations. More lies. Everything was a lie. In one entry, she talked about how Jay had given her a bracelet worth more than our monthly mortgage payment. She wrote about how he understood her, how he made her feel desired, how he wasn't just another boring husband with a 9 to 5. That part stung the most. I had been working myself to exhaustion to make sure we had a comfortable life, to make sure she never had to worry about anything, and yet, in her eyes, I was nothing more than another boring husband. I must have read through 50 entries before my vision started to blur, my hands gripping the journal so tightly I thought I might tear the pages. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for anymore. Proof? I had more than enough. A reason? Nothing she had written could justify what she had done. Some sign that she had felt guilty? If anything, she had enjoyed the deception. She had thrived on it. The last entry I read before I forced myself to stop was from just 2 nights ago. She had written about how she and Jay had spent the weekend together at some private villa, how he had taken her to a secluded restaurant where no one would recognize her, how she had told me she was out of town visiting her mother. I remember that weekend. I had been alone at home, thinking about surprising her with a weekend trip of our own, trying to reconnect, trying to be the husband she deserved. Meanwhile, she was out there, in a world that I wasn't even a part of, living a life that she had kept hidden from me with an ease that was terrifying. I sat there in the dimly lit bedroom, the journal resting in my lap, my mind reeling. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the book across the room, to rip it apart, to wake her up and demand an explanation, but I couldn't move. I felt paralyzed, trapped in the most horrifying reality I had ever faced. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a choice. A series of deliberate, calculated choices that she had made over and over again, without hesitation, without remorse. And now I had to decide what the hell I was going to do about it. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind wouldn't stop spinning, replaying every entry from that journal, every moment of the past year that I now saw for what it truly was, a long, elaborate deception. I sat in the darkness, listening to Lauren's steady breathing as she slept beside me, completely unaware that the house of lies she had built was about to come crashing down. I kept staring at her, wondering how she could do it. How she could pretend so easily. How she could smile at me in the mornings, kiss me goodbye, ask about my day, all while sneaking away to her other life. Every time I thought about it, the anger inside me flared up again, burning hot and violent, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I confronted her in a blind rage, she would twist it. She would gaslight me, make me question myself, turn the whole thing into something that somehow made me look like the problem. No, I wasn't going to give her that chance. I needed her to tell me the truth. I needed her to say it out loud. Morning came, and with it the suffocating weight of what I had to do. Lauren stretched lazily, smiling at me like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't been writing down every disgusting detail of her betrayal in a journal she had foolishly left in her nightstand. I could barely look at her. My stomach turned at the sight of her so at ease, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I forced myself to act normal, waiting until she had her morning coffee, until she was fully awake, until there was no escape for her. Then, without saying a word, I set the journal down on the table between us. I watched her expression carefully, waiting for the moment she would realize what I had found. At first, there was confusion. Her brow furrowed, her lips parting slightly as if she was about to ask what she was looking at. Then, as her eyes focused on the familiar handwriting, I saw it, the briefest flicker of panic. It was fast, barely there, but I caught it. That was all I needed. She knew exactly what it was. She knew exactly what I had read. And yet, she still tried to play it off. She reached for the journal slowly, flipping it open like she was seeing it for the first time, like she had no idea what it contained. I could feel the fury bubbling just under the surface, but I clenched my jaw and stayed silent, waiting to see what pathetic excuse she would come up with. When she finally spoke, her voice was light, dismissive, as if we were discussing something as trivial as a forgotten grocery list. "Oh, this," she said, flipping through the pages carelessly. "It's just a journal. I write things down sometimes." That was it. That was the best she could come up with. I could feel my hands tightening into fists, my nails digging into my palms, but I kept my face neutral. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. I wasn't going to let her make this about anything other than what it was, a full-blown betrayal, premeditated and shameless. I asked her how long she had been lying to me. She rolled her eyes, sighing as if I were being dramatic, as if I were overreacting to something insignificant. "I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this," she said, tossing the journal aside like it was nothing. "It's just a bunch of thoughts. You know how I like to write." I felt something inside me snap at the sheer audacity of her words. Just a bunch of thoughts? Just writing? I had read her detailed accounts of how she had laughed at me, how she had carefully crafted lie after lie, how she had enjoyed sneaking around, feeling like she was above getting caught. There was no remorse in her voice, no guilt, no fear. It was almost as if she was bored by the fact that I had finally figured it out. I pressed her, forcing her to acknowledge what I had read. I told her I knew everything, the expensive gifts, the weekend getaways, the way she had used me as nothing more than a convenient cover for her double life. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest, and for the first time, she dropped the act. A slow smirk curled at the edge of her lips, and her eyes gleamed with something I can only describe as amusement. That was when I realized something that made my stomach turn even more than the journal itself. She wasn't sorry. Not even a little. "Oh, come on," she said, her tone shifting into something almost condescending. "You had to have known, Ryan. You really thought I was just out with friends all those nights? You thought the random shopping sprees just appeared out of nowhere?" She laughed then, an actual laugh, shaking her head like I was some clueless idiot who had finally stumbled onto the truth but was still too stupid to fully grasp it. "You work too much," she continued, her voice dripping with indifference. "You never pay attention." It was easy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. She was standing in front of me, mocking me for believing in her, for trusting her. The woman I had loved, the woman I had married, had never really existed. She had been a mirage, a carefully constructed illusion, and now that the truth was out, she didn't even have the decency to pretend to regret it. I demanded to know who he was. The man she had spent a year sneaking off with, the man she had chosen over our marriage. She shrugged. "Does it matter?" she said casually, reaching for her coffee like this was just another morning, just another conversation. "He's someone who can give me things you never could. And honestly, I think I deserve it." That was it. That was the moment any lingering hope of salvaging this marriage died. I had thought maybe that she would cry, that she would apologize, that she would try to fight for what we had. But there was nothing in her eyes but cold indifference. She had already moved on. She had already left our marriage behind long before I had even known it was crumbling. And the worst part? She enjoyed watching me realize it. I felt a strange sense of clarity in that moment, as if everything that had once felt confusing now made perfect sense. I wasn't going to fight for this. I wasn't going to beg for an explanation. There was nothing left to save. Lauren had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I didn't know exactly what my next steps would be, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being played. Done being lied to. Done being her fool. She had spent a year writing about her deception. Now it was time for me to write my own ending. The weight of the confrontation stayed with me long after I had walked out of that room, long after Lauren had dismissed me like I was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. I had always imagined that if something like this ever happened, if I ever found out that my wife had betrayed me, I would be angry, that I would scream, that I would break things, that I would lash out in a way that made it clear how deeply I had been hurt. But in reality, the anger felt hollow compared to the crushing emptiness that took its place. It was like staring at the wreckage of a house after a fire, knowing that nothing could be salvaged, that everything I had built with her, every moment we had shared, had already turned to ashes long before I even realized the flames had started. I didn't know what to do with myself. There was no guidebook on how to process something like this, no step-by-step manual on how to handle the knowledge that the person you trusted most had spent an entire year lying to your face. I went through the motions of my daily life, but everything felt surreal, as if I were watching myself from the outside. I still went to work, but I barely registered anything that was happening around me. My coworkers asked if I was okay, and I forced out the same tired response, yeah, just tired. It was easier than explaining that my wife had been keeping a detailed record of her affair in a journal, writing down every lie she had told me, every moment she had shared with someone else, as if our marriage had been nothing more than a footnote in her real life. Nights were the worst. The house felt suffocating, full of ghosts of conversations that had never meant anything, memories that now felt tainted. I couldn't sleep in the same bed with her anymore. I couldn't even stand to be in the same room with her for too long. Every time I saw her, all I could think about was the way she had looked at me when she finally admitted the truth, amused. Not guilty, not remorseful, not even ashamed. She had looked at me like I was pathetic, like I was a joke, like I was something beneath her. And that realization cut deeper than anything else. I kept replaying the past year in my head, trying to pinpoint the moment where I had lost her, where things had started to fall apart. I had thought we were just going through a rough patch, that maybe we had been distant because of work stress or life getting in the way. I had blamed myself for so long, wondering if I hadn't been attentive enough, if I had missed some obvious sign that she was slipping away. But looking back now, I realized that it had never been about me. Lauren hadn't strayed because something was wrong with our marriage, she had strayed because she wanted to. Because she craved something else, something more glamorous, something that made her feel powerful. It had never been about my shortcomings. It had always been about her own selfishness. I started noticing other things, things I had ignored before. The way she had talked down to me in recent months, the way she had slowly stopped showing any interest in my life, the way she had made me feel like I was the problem whenever I asked her what was wrong. She had been detaching herself from me long before I found the journal. She had been preparing herself to leave emotionally while I was still trying to figure out how to fix what I didn't even know was broken. That realization hurt more than the affair itself. She had spent an entire year knowing she was going to walk away, knowing she was going to throw everything we had away, and she had done it so effortlessly. There were moments when I wanted to confront her again, to demand some kind of explanation that made sense, to make her understand just how much she had hurt me. But what would be the point? She didn't care. That was the worst part of all of this, she didn't care. She had built a life outside of our marriage, and I was nothing more than a placeholder, a safety net, something to come home to when she was done playing pretend in her secret world. There was no undoing what she had done. There was no repairing the damage. Even if she suddenly fell to her knees and begged for forgiveness, even if she miraculously realized the depth of her betrayal, it wouldn't change the fact that she had made a choice. And that choice had destroyed us. I tried to distract myself, but nothing helped. Friends reached out, offering to meet up, to talk, to help take my mind off things, but I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to tell people what had happened, to say the words out loud and make it all feel even more real than it already did. I wasn't ready to see the pity in their eyes, the awkward silences when they struggled to find the right words. I wasn't ready for any of it. So I isolated myself instead, letting the weight of the betrayal sink in, letting myself feel every ounce of the hurt that I had been trying to suppress. And then, at some point, the sadness turned into something else, something colder, something more final. I realized that the pain wasn't going to go away overnight, that it would take time, that I would have to go through the process of mourning what I had lost. But I also realized something else. I didn't have to keep suffering in the same space as her. I didn't have to keep letting her presence be a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I didn't have to keep torturing myself with the what-ifs and whys that had been running through my head since I found that journal. The sadness was still there, but beneath it, something else was growing, resolve. I didn't know exactly what my next step was going to be, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done letting her control my emotions. I was done being the victim in her story. If she had already moved on, then it was time for me to do the same. Even if it hurt. Even if it meant walking away from everything I had built. Because staying would mean slowly letting myself rot in the aftermath of her betrayal. And no matter how much I had loved her, no matter how much I had given to our marriage, I refused to let her take that from me too. After the initial shock had worn off, after the anger had burned through me and left nothing but exhaustion in its place, I finally saw the situation for what it was. Lauren had made her choice long before I had discovered the truth, and now it was my turn. I had spent too many sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, trapped in a cycle of disbelief, humiliation, and rage. I had spent too much time wondering if there was anything salvageable left in our marriage, if there was a version of this story where I could look past her betrayal and rebuild what had been broken. But no matter how many times I turned it over in my mind, the answer was always the same. There was nothing left to save. Lauren wasn't sorry. She wasn't devastated by what she had done. She had laughed in my face when I confronted her. She had mocked my ignorance, ridiculed my trust, and treated my pain as nothing more than an inconvenience. She had been lying to me for a year, documenting her deception like it was some kind of personal achievement, and I had been blind to it the entire time. The weight of that realization settled deep in my bones. I had wasted enough time grieving the version of my marriage that had only ever existed in my mind. The reality was much colder, much crueler. Lauren had never been the person I thought she was. Maybe she had been once, or maybe I had just been fooling myself all along, seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was right in front of me. Either way, I wasn't going to let her take any more of my time, my energy, or my sanity. I wasn't going to fight for something that was already dead. I wasn't going to beg her to love me, to respect me, to choose me over the luxury and excitement she had found in the arms of another man. If she wanted that world so badly, she could have it. I wasn't going to be her backup plan. Making the decision to leave was one thing, but actually following through with it was another. It felt surreal, packing up my things, sorting through the life we had built together and deciding what was mine to take and what I was willing to leave behind. Every item in our home carried memories, and each one felt like another knife to the gut as I threw it into a box. The couch where we had spent lazy Sundays watching movies. The framed pictures from vacations that, in hindsight, felt like a lie. The closet filled with clothes I had once loved but now felt like they belonged to a different man. A man who hadn't yet learned what betrayal tasted like. I wanted to burn everything, to erase every trace of her from my life. But I knew that wouldn't change anything. The past was done, and no amount of destruction would make it hurt any less. Lauren barely reacted when I told her I was leaving. She shrugged, barely looking up from her phone, and said, "You're being dramatic." That was it. No apology, no attempt to stop me, not even a half-hearted excuse. If anything, she seemed relieved that she didn't have to pretend anymore. She didn't beg me to stay. She didn't ask me to reconsider. She didn't try to convince me that our marriage was worth fighting for. Because to her, it wasn't. It never had been. I could see it so clearly now. I had spent so much time trying to be a good husband, to be enough for her, and all the while she had been looking past me waiting for something better to come along. I felt stupid for ever believing that she had loved me the way I had loved her. Maybe she had once. Or maybe she had just loved what I could provide, stability, predictability, the comfort of knowing that I would always be there no matter what. But now that she had found someone who could give her more, someone who could drape her in luxury and take her to places I couldn't afford, I had become disposable. That realization didn't make it hurt any less, but it did make things clearer. I wasn't losing a wife. I was losing an illusion. And as much as it gutted me to admit it, I knew I would be better off without her. I deserved more than to be someone's safety net, someone's boring backup plan. I deserved someone who would choose me without hesitation, not someone who saw me as a placeholder while she chased after something shinier. I had spent so much time feeling like a fool, blaming myself for not being enough, but in the end, it had never been about me. Lauren's betrayal had nothing to do with what I lacked and everything to do with who she was. Leaving was the hardest thing I had ever done, but at the same time it was the easiest. There was no part of me that wanted to fight for her anymore. There was no part of me that still saw a future with her. The moment I walked out of that house, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: relief. The weight that had been crushing me lifted, and for the first time since I found that journal, I could breathe. It still hurt, of course. It would take time for the wound to fully heal, but at least now I knew I was walking away from something toxic instead of trying to salvage it. I didn't tell her goodbye. I didn't owe her that. She had already said everything I needed to hear when she looked me in the eye and laughed at my pain. She had made her choice. And now I had made mine. I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the humiliation. Done with her. For good. Leaving wasn't the end of the pain, but it was the beginning of something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't drowning in doubt, in confusion, in that gut-wrenching feeling that something was off but not being able to put my finger on it. The truth had burned away the fog, and as much as it hurt, as much as it had torn me apart, I could finally see clearly. Lauren had been gone long before I found that journal. I had spent months trying to hold onto something that wasn't even real, trying to fix a marriage that had already been hollowed out from the inside. I had been fighting for a woman who had already chosen someone else, and the worst part was she had never even considered the damage she was doing. She had lied to me, manipulated me, mocked me in her own private writings, and when she was finally caught, she hadn't felt an ounce of remorse. That was the part one would never forget, not just the betrayal itself, but the way she had looked at me when I confronted her, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience, a fool who had finally stumbled onto the truth too late. The days and weeks after I left were a strange mix of emotions. There was pain, of course, this deep, raw ache that wouldn't go away, like a wound that kept reopening every time I remembered another detail, another lie, another moment where I had unknowingly been played. But there was also something else. A kind of freedom I hadn't expected. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. I had spent so long wrapped up in our marriage, in trying to be the husband Lauren wanted, that I had forgotten who I was outside of that role. The house we had lived in wasn't my home anymore, just a place filled with reminders of a life I no longer wanted. I packed up what I needed and started over somewhere new, somewhere untouched by her deception, somewhere that didn't carry the echoes of our past. It was hard, stripping everything down to the essentials, leaving behind things that had once meant so much to me but now felt tainted. But it was necessary. I stopped torturing myself with questions that had no answers. Why had she done it? Was I not good enough? Had she ever loved me at all, or had I just been convenient until something better came along? Those questions used to consume me, but eventually I realized they didn't matter. I would never get the answers I wanted, and even if I did, they wouldn't change anything. Lauren's actions were about her, not me. I could drive myself crazy dissecting every detail, trying to find the exact moment when she decided I wasn't enough for her, but what good would that do? The only thing I had control over now was what came next. My life. My healing. My future. At first, it was difficult to trust again. Not just other people, but myself. I had been so sure of Lauren, so confident in our marriage, and I had been wrong. That kind of betrayal messes with your head, makes you question your own judgment, makes you wonder if you'll ever be able to tell when someone is lying to you again. But with time, I learned that what happened with Lauren wasn't a reflection of my ability to trust. It was a reflection of her ability to betray. Not everyone is like her. Not everyone sees love as a game to be played, as something disposable. I started rebuilding little by little. I forced myself to go out, to reconnect with people I had pushed away when I was too focused on trying to save a marriage that was already dead. I started focusing on things that made me happy, not just what made sense within the confines of being someone's husband. There were moments when the past still crept in, when I would hear a song or pass by a place that reminded me of her and feel that familiar sting in my chest. But those moments became fewer and farther between. The anger faded, the sadness dulled, and in its place came something I never thought I would feel again, peace. Not overnight, not all at once, but gradually, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying was finally being lifted. I had spent so much time being angry, so much time feeling like I had been destroyed by what she did. But in the end, she hadn't broken me. She had just shown me who she really was. And once I stopped clinging to the illusion of who I thought she was, I realized that I was better off without her. Looking back now, I see everything so clearly. The warning signs I ignored, the red flags I brushed aside, the ways I convinced myself that everything was fine even when I knew, deep down, that it wasn't. If I could go back and talk to the version of myself who was desperately trying to make sense of Lauren's distant behavior, who was making excuses for why she was always gone, why she never seemed happy with me anymore, I would tell him to stop wasting his time, to trust his gut, to walk away sooner, before he had to find out the truth in the most brutal way possible. But even though I wish I had seen it coming, I don't regret what happened, because it taught me something I needed to learn. I learned that love, real love, isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts or the thrill of secrecy. It's about trust, about honesty, about choosing someone every single day, even when it's not exciting, even when it's hard. I learned that if someone truly values you, they won't make you question your worth. They won't make you feel like you have to compete for their attention, like you have to prove you're good enough. Love should never feel like a game. And if someone treats it like one, if they treat you like one, then you need to walk away before you lose yourself trying to win something that was never meant for you in the first place. To anyone reading this who has been through something similar, or who is sitting in that gut-wrenching space of knowing something is wrong but being too afraid to find out the truth, I promise you, you are stronger than you think. You will get through it. It will hurt like hell, but you will come out on the other side, and when you do, you will realize that you were never the weak one. The weak one was the person who lied, the person who betrayed, the person who thought they could have everything without consequences. In the end, Lauren lost more than I did. She lost someone who truly loved her, someone who would have done anything for her. And I lost someone who never deserved me in the first place. And that is a loss I will never grieve.